What's up? This is All Up in Your Biz with Yvonne Trakian, and I am getting all up in the biz of Dr. Sarah McKay, a neuroscientist, an author, and a mom. But before we start, I have a feeling that this lawyer and neuroscientist might be debating a little bit because as a mom of four, your face, as a mom of four small kids, 5 and under, I feel like I say baby brain all the time. I feel like my brain, and I say this to myself, and I need to remind myself not to be repeating it, does not work the same way that it used to. And I am not sure that Dr. McKay thinks the same way. So let's see. Let's check this out. First question for you is, biggest misconception about the female brain?
Oh gosh, I think the biggest misconception about the female brain is it's solely driven by ovarian hormones and that they're kind of like in the driving seat, and therefore it doesn't matter whether the hormones are kind of going up, they're sky high, you're going through puberty, menstrual cycle, pregnancy, menopause, that when you combine hormones with a female brain, that automatically equals cognitive dysfunction and emotional dysregulation.
But I feel like before I get, like, I'm a huge believer in manifestation, and we are going to get into that because I've seen an amazing article that you wrote on LinkedIn about the RAS. You were not so happy about that, so we're going to talk about that later. But I
I,
genuinely,
I like a bit of neuroscience, not a bit of a
not
anyway.
neuro
Carry on.
nonsense.
Not neuro nonsense. Not about the
um,
neuro nonsense.
but I feel like before I get my menstrual cycle, that like it's like my brain just goes into this sort of lack of self-confidence. Not really self-confidence, but there's way more doubt. There's way more questioning what I'm doing. You know, I've got the podcast, the side business, but just before that run up to it, it's like, why am I doing this? Nobody's going to buy this stuff. When I go on social media, I don't really want to be on social media during that time. I feel like I have nothing to say. If I have anything to say, it's a little bit more negative. And then as I go through my cycle, I do feel like, oh my God, like ovulation time, I'm like, I am gonna get it. Like I am delusional with my goals and my dreams. So does the brain, like, is there an impact there on your actual menstrual cycle?
Yeah, look, that's interesting because when I went so I've written a couple of books on the female brain and kind of what happens to us across the course of our lives and the day and the month and the year and womb to tomb. And one of the questions I had, and when I was writing my first book, was about what's happening to our brain during the course of a menstrual cycle. And if we're asking neuroscience questions about kind of ourselves, we need to be quite precise so we can ask questions that can get answered in a really clear way using science and using data. And I went in looking at what happens to our cognition. So cognition is really sort of our thinking, our decision making, our attention, our problem solving, all of the kind of those sort of thinking higher order skills that our brain does. And all of the studies that have been done kind of looking across the course of the menstrual cycle or when hormone levels are high or low, we're just not picking up any good clear signals that hormones are impacting cognition or thinking. Great news. That's why I can be a scientist. You can be a lawyer. That's why we can be fully functioning members of the workplace, complete school, go to university, do all of the thinking that any decent human is fully capable of doing, regardless of what kind of our hormone levels are. There wouldn't really be a good adaptive benefit when we think about evolution, and sometimes I use the word Mother Nature interchangeably. There would be no adaptive benefit for women to become kind of more or less stupid across the course of the month. Emotions are a little bit different, and emotions are more kind of, the sensations in our body, which are signaling to us our feelings and then our interpretations of them, which kind of then help us make decisions or, sort of help us inform us biologically what we need to do next. That's really kind of what an emotion is. It's a concept we've created based on a feeling within our body. And then the studies, so we've set cognition aside, hormones, cognition, great. when we're looking at hormones and thinking, hormones and emotions, I was really interested. I thought I'll go in and have a look at PMS, which is kind of what you've described. Let's look at what we understand about how emotions might track across the course of a menstrual cycle. And what I did was I went to one of the sort of the greatest, sort of the strongest sort of data sets that we can have in science, and that's a meta-analysis. So we pulled together data from lots of different studies, and this was looking at PMS rates in different countries around the world, because I was like, who gets PMS? Is it everyone, or is it no one? Is it 5%? Is it 50%? Is it 75% of women feel kind of emotional, that kind of emotional turmoil? And it was really interesting because it varied widely and wildly by country. So some countries in the world, France being one of them, was about like sort of 5 to 10% of women went, yep, I feel like that before my period. In Iran, it was around 90%, and it was all these different countries kind of somewhere between 10 and 90%. Spain was about 30%, China's about 50%, Australia's about 50%. It totally depends on where in the world you are, which country in the world you are, who's reporting rates of PMS. And that's really weird, right? Because if it's to do with hormones, why does it vary so much depending on the culture and the society in which you live? Perhaps it's something to do with the messages that we've grown up with, the stories we're telling ourselves. And some other researchers have gone in and said, look, let's verify clear emotional tracking based on menstrual cycle day, but let's not tell the women that that's what we're studying. Because as soon as you tell people, you kind of, bring some bias in, then, you'll start to see the data shift. So in studies where women have tracked menstrual cycle day, tracked their emotions, positive and negative and neutral emotions, track things like stress, track things like overall well-being, track things like social and emotional support, we don't find clear variation of mood based on day of the month in most women. And about 10% of women we do. You might be one of those 10%, and 90% of women we don't, when they're blinded to what it's being studied. So women are more broadly, women biologically are more like the French woman, saying, yeah, only 10%. Countries where there's less gender equality, where women feel they haven't got a voice, the rates of PMS are much higher.
Oh, wow.
Because they've got a reason to then be able to have a voice. And there's a lot of feminist kind of narratives around this as well, that PMS just kind of gives women permission to be pissed off and angry and say how they think and feel. But there's a subset of women, and we see this when women going through pregnancy, postnatally. We see this in terms of, sort of vulnerability, depression and anxiety. We see this again at menopause. We've got subsets of women. Some women are much more vulnerable to shifts in hormones. Other women are pretty resilient. So it may be, sure, your emotions may swing based on your menstrual cycle.
That's just so interesting.
You might be one of these.
Yeah.
But that's not the case for everyone. And there's a very, very, very clear gendered sort of pattern in there based on where you live in the world.
That is so interesting, because I would have actually thought the opposite. I would have just thought that only 10% of women don't have some sort of PMS before kind of their menstrual cycle. But I definitely feel like, and maybe this is, I don't know, I think that since I've become a mom, I've noticed it even more. Like I've noticed that timing just before the menstrual cycle to be a bit more, just to be a bit more flat and down. And maybe that's because so how? Well,
I was speaking to this researcher about this, and I said, are we telling these women that it's in their head? She said, no, we're not saying that. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying that either. But I think we have this very strong tendency, as I've said, to kind of hang our hat on the closest hook, to go, oh, well, hormones in a female brain, that just equals cognitive. You're saying all women are cognitively and emotionally unstable before their periods. That doesn't mean they are. That just means that you have told yourself that story. Some women will be, and I'm not denying that. But we do need, when we've got data and we've got information like this, we can step back and go, and as this researcher, Sarah Romans, who's a female women's health psychiatrist in New Zealand, did this study. And she said the clearer variation on mood was based on overall well-being, was based on how stressed women felt, but the strongest data signal clearly emerged, and this emerged in all of my research as well, was how socially supported women felt. So she jokingly said it's more likely they were pissed off with their husbands for not taking the bins out at night than it was their hormones. And I
Yeah.
think this is really important because we have a lot of agency over, how we can build good, strong social relationships, how we can work on well-being, how we can work on stress reduction. We can't do anything about hormones. I mean, you could take the pill and have your hormones sky high for a couple of decades if you like. Take the pill continuously. You go knock yourself out. Do that. I did that for a long time. You have got but a lot of women don't choose that for various reasons. But you do. So what I'm saying is, there's a lot of things that we do have agency over, which can feed into an emotional state. Hormones aren't always the one driving the car. But we can tell ourselves that story and then it can manifest. That's the word you want to use.
Yeah, and I think you have just given me such an aha moment. You've given me this aha moment because I always tell people, be very conscious of what you're telling yourself. It's hard, it's never going to happen for me. But I'm always telling myself, before my menstrual cycle, I'm a bitch, and my mood is low and I doubt myself and
Mm,
I feel like giving up.
mm,
So I'm really going to change
mm,
that tune.
mm. And
So,
I think
yeah.
not only how we talk to ourselves, how we talk to our daughters. Well, I've got sons, but women are told this message. We said this at the beginning, from puberty, that your hormones have this kind of negative influence. You combine them with a brain, you get cognitive dysfunction and emotional instability. That's almost a given, and that's not the case. It is. Some women are vulnerable, and some women, go through phases of life when, they are kind of more at sea and the hormones are driving the car. But in a healthy, well woman, that's not how we evolved. That's not Mother Nature's intention.
So what would you recommend for people they still have their menstrual cycle, or they're raising daughters that have a menstrual cycle, and they say things like, "Oh yeah, she's getting her period. Oh, she's getting her time of the month.
Okay.
Of course, she's a bit like cranky." Like what
Well,
would
you're
you
teaching those girls that that's how they should be feeling at that time of the month.
Yeah.
I think that first step is the awareness of what language we're using and how we're kind of laying this foundation that someone will carry through with them for life. And we'll talk about this for baby brain as well. That when you've got hormonal fluctuations, that's the inevitable outcome.
I think that's great. Actually, I have 3 boys, but I do have 1 girl, and,
Mm,
I'm definitely gonna take that on bo now she's 3 years old, right? But I'm just
mm,
gonna remember it for myself because, I
yeah,
I
yeah,
remember recently having a conversation with my husband, and I said to him, I was like, "Go easy on me. I'm about to get my period." And he looked at me and he was like, I wish I had something that I could blame on every single month." And I looked at him and I was like, I do too.
yeah.
I wish you had something that I wish you could feel how I feel right now. So I'm
Yeah.
definitely going
I
to
think
change it up.
I think understanding how our brains create emotional experiences is really important. And as I said, we have these biological signals coming from our bottom up body. And you would know with little kids. I always say when my boys were little, when the water was low, the rocks would show. When they were thirsty, when they were hungry, when they were tired, they were cranky as. So you just had to kind of top them up with whatever they needed: the food, the water, the sleep. Okay, and we're not actually that different. So we have biological signals, but we've also got the context we're in, and then we've also got the meaning that we're making, the words that we use, the kind of the stories and the kind of the social narratives that we're carrying through. And that's what creates an emotional state at any one point in time. It's not just a hormone. It's the state of your body and the context and the meaning you're making of that. And I think that many of us, I just randomly didn't grow up with a mother who talked about time of the month making her cranky. I'm very fortunate in that. But we're then not giving ourselves the opportunity to look out at what else may be going on, that we perhaps could be tweaking some other levers to kind of push or pull on. And
And
and I think it's important when kids, not just girls, but boys go through puberty. Similarly, from my research, I have learned that and I've never said this to my boys, if I've got a cranky teenager, it's their hormones. There's so much going on when they're entering puberty. They're moving from primary school to high school. Their social world is turning upside down as they make that big transition. Their bodies are changing. Their bodies are changing in the context of their friendship groups. their adolescent brain plasticity is sort of switching on. That's moving them from kind of the family being the focus to friends being the focus. They're having to develop kind of like courage, which can sometimes show up as bravado, because biologically they really be needing to be like kind of pulling away from the family and moving out into the world. So they're changing kind of, socially, contextually, in terms of school, physically, socially, psychologically, neurologically. And we go, oh, it's their hormones. We don't, and that removes any ability for us to look at a bigger context about what's going on in young people's lives.
As a mom, you have just given me just so much food for thought. Like, I'm actually going to change the way I parent because of what you've just said. Like, I tell people to stop associating certain things, telling themselves certain things. But I do it myself with hormones. Oh, it's the hormones. My niece, if she's like that, I'm like, oh, it's her time. So it's and as I have small kids, I recognize now that I'm actually going to have to cut that out and just look at the bigger picture and not pinpoint it. So they go through their life thinking, oh, it's the hormones. Oh, it's the hormones. Oh, it's the hormones. So that's so interesting. You had an amazing, you had an amazing post on your Instagram about women getting pregnant and getting pregnant with girls versus boys and the placenta and the chromosomes. Can you explain what happens when you get pregnant with a boy versus a girl?
Yeah, this is funny because people don't realize that placenta has a biological sex too. But if you just think about the basics of kind of reproductive biology that you would have even learned in school, sperm meets egg, there's an X and a Y or an X and an X, and if there's two X's, it's a girl, and if there's an X and the Y, it's the boy, and we're going to set aside any conversations about gender and just look at biology. And then that little fertilized egg rolls down the fallopian tube and embeds in the wall of the uterus, and then half of it kind of forms the placenta and the other half forms the baby. So the placenta has a biological sex too. It is either male or female, which blows people's minds when they think about it. And how is that relevant? What does that kind of mean? It may mean nothing, but we do know that if we look at some disorders of what we might call neurodevelopmental disorders, so they might be neurodivergencies, which may show up when kids are young, like kind of in their preschool years or early childhood, perhaps things like autism, perhaps things like ADHD, those kind of not mood disorders which would develop later in life, or Alzheimer's, which would develop, when you're very, very old, but these sort of early childhood, neurodevelopmental disorders, boys appear to have a higher rate. More boys would be diagnosed than girls. Girls are still diagnosed with some of these. But one of the reasons why may be we think that the male placenta is just slightly less resilient in utero against kind of perhaps toxins moving from the mother or stress hormones moving from the mother into the baby. The placenta is really kind of providing not just a barrier, but it's kind of an exchange. And it may be that there are biological differences between a male placenta and a female placenta, which may mean that those little boys in utero are slightly more vulnerable to, some kind of insult when their brains are going through specific periods of development. That's just kind of one theory in there.
But why would theirs be, like, why wouldn't it be the same? Like, why does one placenta?
We don't know.
Oh, you don't know.
Yeah, we don't know. I mean, this is just one idea. Is we know that it may just be that the male placenta is just slightly more vulnerable than the female placenta. We know that newborn baby boys are at higher risk, of everything from kind of breathing problems, etc., through to these disorders. Slightly more. I mean, you're still getting girls vulnerable too, but it may be something to do with the biology of the placenta. And that's just one idea that's out there, but it's quite a new field of research that we're really kind of not that familiar with. There was some other things I put on my Instagram, and I'm not sure whether that's what you're getting at, talking about this phenomenon called microchimerism, whereby you get the cells of your unborn baby becoming kind of embedded in your body and your brain. Most of them kind of get cleared out by your immune system. but we know a lot of them kind of persist for the life of the mum, because we've found women who have had baby boys, we do find XY cells within their body after their pregnancies, and those cells can kind of become embedded within them, and make a happy home and sort of live with you for life. We can't identify the girl cells because you're obviously biological female, whereas you can identify the biological male cells, which have been passed over from your unborn baby boy through the placenta and found their way into your body,
Yeah,
which is quite a nice little thought. Yeah.
this actually makes me a little bit emotional because today,
Mm.
4 years ago, I buried a little girl at 5.5 months pregnancy. Her name was Polly. It's the reason why I started the podcast and my brand, Pause Penny.
Little darling.
But to think that some of her cells could be in my brain is just like a beautiful...
And in your heart.
Yeah. But to have that piece of her still with it, does it happen at a certain point, or do you just think it happens from kind of conception?
It probably happens, I mean, once the placenta's kind of there and functioning. So perhaps, within that first trimester, certainly. And again, we're not really entirely sure what the reason is. We know it's there. We know it happens. I think it's just kind of nice to think you carry a little piece of them within you. And what's really kind of funny is, like, say you have a boy pregnancy first and then you have a girl pregnancy, some of the male cells could make their way from your body back through your placenta into your daughter, so your daughter can have some of your son's cells. I mean, these are very rare, cases and very rare cells, but certainly it's a phenomenon that exists. We're not sure what the adaptive benefit would be. I mean, if something sort of sticks around, evolution has decided it's useful, usually. As I say, Mother Nature's usually reasonably wise. But if nothing else, it can provide a lot of people comfort, particularly if they have lost a baby, knowing, well, you are still kind of carrying a little bit of them around with you. And especially once you get teenagers, I know when you've got children who haven't yet started school, you just kind of want to have a bit of time away from them. In the blink of an eye, I swear, in the blink of an eye, they're teenagers, and like the roles are reversed, and you're kind of like following them around the house, asking them for a bit of attention.
I know. I was looking up a couple things,
wild.
and I was like, this is what my son texts me back, like, how are you? Good. Where are you having a good time? Yes. It's like,
that's a lot of words. Sometimes you just get the letter K. You say, are you good? I just get K. You don't get okay, you just get K.
Yeah. So talk to me
you become
about...
very needy.
Yeah. If you want to manifest your dream life, then what are you waiting for? Pause Penny has created an amazing manifestation box to help you manifest your dreams. It is backed by neuroscience. 7 simple steps, and the box tells you how to do it all. Grab your manifestation box at pausepenny.com and use the code podcast20 for 20% off. Talk to me about the female brain and what happens when we become pregnant and post-pregnancy and how our brain changes. Because I know from me and from my friends that we all say the same thing. Baby brain, I can't remember things. I definitely think my intuition is way, like, for example, like I told you about the baby that passed away. I knew before I was going in, I was like, there's something not right here. I know there's something not right. I knew, I had this intuition, this gut feeling. I just knew. Whereas my husband just would be like, well, he's not carrying the baby, but it's based on logic and reason, but I knew. So, but we do tell ourselves, oh, it's baby brain. My brain is foggy. I can't remember. And I do actually feel like that. I feel like as I've aged and as I've had kids, I could go upstairs into the bathroom, like to get, I don't know, like a towel or something. I'm like, what did I come up here for? I have to write things down and work because I just feel like I forget more. And I wonder is that because I just am totally consumed by so many things and our brain can only handle so much? Or is it because, oh my God,
Mm,
my brain has changed because I've had a baby and the brain is focusing on the
mm,
kids. It's not focusing on all the other
mm,
million things that you need
mm,
to do.
mm, mm, mm. Well, so there's kind of two parts to this story, and you've almost kind of laid it out there nicely. So I've written a whole book on this because I was quite obsessed with this idea. So the first is that how our brain does change during pregnancy and what that means. And then the second is this kind of colloquial words we use to describe baby brains. So very briefly, our brains do change during, particularly during our first pregnancy. And this is really pretty new research relatively. It was published in sort of January 2017. And I have to like tip my hat to the researchers who spent sort of 8 long, hard years slogging away on this research project. They were based in Barcelona in Spain. And they came up with this idea, these three women. There's Erica Barbara Muller, Elsalina Hoxima, and Susana Carmona. And Susana's actually written her own book in Spanish, kind of on the research. And they started chatting one day, sort of talking about what happens to your brain when you become pregnant. They worked in a brain imaging research lab and realized that there was just no research. There was no research looking at human women's brains over the course of their first pregnancy. There was quite a bit of animal data out there. So they designed a study whereby they got as many women as they could into the research lab who had not yet had a pregnancy, including themselves. They are part of the research study themselves, and they scanned every woman's brain before and then immediately after her first pregnancy. And then as a control, because do good science, you always need a well-designed study, they also got the male partners of those women in, and they scanned their brains before and after the first pregnancy. And that was to see whether any changes that they saw were due to parenting or whether they were due to pregnancy itself. And they saw these remarkable changes, which have since been validated with more data and validated by other studies, showing that there was quite significant structural change in these women's brains over the course of the first pregnancy. And it was mostly in parts of the brain involved with reading social cues or social cognition. So that is, what does someone else think? What does someone else feel? What does someone else need? And what would be the kind of the Mother Nature's intention again of having social cognition, the parts of the brain of over social cognition changing so much during pregnancy. And that's because there is another whole human who you must learn what they think, what they feel, and what they need, and you must tune in to their needs and keep them alive. So there's this enormous kind of adaptive benefit to mothers' brains changing. Pregnancy isn't just preparing our bodies to give birth and to nourish the baby, if that's what you're going to do after the baby's born. It's also preparing your mind for motherhood. So what it's done is it's sort of shifted all your focus in, and your brain's become like very, very flexible. It's become very plastic. Other studies have followed up looking at kind of how well the brain functions, like kind of how, efficient is it? And new mothers' brains are far more flexible and efficient at sort of processing particularly social cues than non-mothers' brains or than fathers' brains. And that's because that's kind of their sole purpose almost. What do we need to keep a new baby alive? We need to respond to it. We need to listen to its cries. We need to pick it up. It's got all of these cues. It smells absolutely divine. You know what a new baby smells like. You don't want to wash them and you want to bottle up that smell forever. You're very, very tuned into their cries. And particularly the first time you go through this process of learning to become a mother, you're needing to it's a very steep learning curve. And so your brain is kind of primed, ready to learn. So we see these significant structural changes. We now know that those changes last a lifetime. We can look at the brains of 1,000 women in their 80s and you can sort them mother, not mother, mother, not mother, based on the structure of their brains. So we know that these changes from the first pregnancy last a lifetime. Now, if we look at kind of this idea of baby brain, and this is really interesting. So if we ask women who are either pregnant or new mothers, and these are very different physiological states. Being pregnant is very different from not being pregnant anymore. But we kind of use this term to cover both physiological states. One of them, sky high estrogen. You will have more estrogen in one pregnancy as a dose than you'll get the entire rest of your lifespan. And estrogen is neuroprotective. It's a cognitive enhancer. It does all of the good things for your brain. You haven't got as much when you're breastfeeding or whether you're just knocking about as a mother for however long you are after the baby's been born. 4 out of 5 women when they're pregnant or when they're new mothers will put up their hands and say, well, I have this baby brain. However it's defined wherever you live in the world, kind of not being able to kind of function cognitively as well as you felt you could. Your attention isn't quite as good. Your memory isn't quite as good. You walk into a room, you forget what you were going to do. 1 out of 5 women will not report that. And just to be honest, I was one of the 5. I never felt that, but I didn't actually know it was a thing either. So that's kind of perhaps a little bit telling. Perhaps a lot of the messages a lot of women received, I never received growing up. I don't know whether it was growing up in New Zealand as a Kiwi childhood, pretty down to earth, just kind of get on with things. Didn't learn about PMS, didn't learn about baby brain, didn't experience them. I could not let that idea go, and that was one of the reasons why I wanted to write the book, because I kind of wanted to interrogate that experience of my own as well, using data. And so we've got 4 out of 5 women saying, yeah, I'm forgetful. So we're like, well, easy, let's bring you into the research labs, sit you down in a nice quiet room, and let's do our cognitive testing on you. We've got all of these tests. We can test for attention and memory and reaction time and remembering lists of words and numbers, and, we'll tell you a story. Can you retell it an hour later or a couple of days later? We're not picking up anything. We're not picking up any cognitive decline. We're not picking up any signals which would cause anyone to be concerned whatsoever about anything, except one little point in time, the 3rd trimester of pregnancy. And you remember what that's like. You're like really massive and fat and you can't sleep. And
peeing
kind of
10,000 especially times a night.
We sometimes pick up a little data signal there. Some women in some studies, some of the time. Not every study, not all women. Sometimes if we're going to pick something up, we've got like these cognitive tests that we do on women. And like, so we might, like, say if you're going to go to your GP and say, like, I'm really forgetful, they'd do this thing called like a mini mental state exam. And they would give it to your gran as well to test if she needed to go off to be assessed for dementia. And it kind of gives you a score out of 30. And if you score below about 24, we're like, the doctor's like, oh, I think we need to send you off for further testing. If you score 25 or above, you're fine. What we might be seeing in some women in this 3rd trimester of pregnancy is normally they're scoring like 30, maybe they score 29. So we're seeing a tiny signal there, but it's not clinical, it's not cognitive decline. It could be lack of sleep. It could be this massive reorganization of the brain going on. It could be these super high levels of hormones. It could be something going on, but it's not all women. But you can do other types of cognitive testing at this same point in time, the 3rd trimester of pregnancy. Ask women things like, memorize here. We're going to take you to like the IKEA of baby strollers and teach women how to navigate their way through a maze and remember where the baby strollers are and the prices of pushchairs and the prices of bottles and the prices of nappies and the prices of cots. Pregnant women, extraordinary memory for that. They'll beat anyone else, any other demographic that you've got going around. So we can also see enhancement in memory in that point in pregnancy. When women are new mums, we're not picking up any data signals whatsoever. It's also interesting if we look to other mums in the mammalian kingdom. So they don't read books on what to expect when they're expecting. They haven't had someone telling them that they'll get baby brain from when they were going through puberty. And if we look at they're kind of an ecologically relevant task. So if they're a hunter, they'll get better at predation. They'll be a better predator. If they're a little scurrying animal of the, finding nuts and seeds, they'll get better at navigating their way through a maze. If they're like a herding animal, they're a sheep, they need to be able to detect the smell of their lamb amongst 100 other lambs. Their olfactory brain will like go into overdrive in terms of being able to function really, really well and smell specific smells. So all the other mothers get better at doing what they do. It's just us women who have been told from puberty that if you combine a hormone with the brain, you should expect disaster. But now we've got a paradox, right? You're saying you and your mates have baby brain, and I'm saying we're not picking anything up in the research lab. So how do we kind of tease that out? And you did kind of touch on this. What you remember depends on what you pay attention to. So memory depends on attention, what information you take in, what information you filter out. And when you're a new mum, you're not meant to be answering your emails. You're not meant to be remembering where your keys are. You've evolved and your brain has shaped and changed to pay attention to keeping your baby alive. You'll be spending 17 hours of your day, if you're awake, thinking about your baby. So your attention has been primed, almost pushed by Mother Nature and by your neurological changes to focus in on your baby and almost to filter out all of the other things that are not important. So we have that kind of biological drive. But what do modern women do? Go, oh, I can still do it all. I can still be a neuroscientist. I can still be a lawyer. I can do a podcast. I can have 4 children under 5 and run a podcast in a podcast studio and interview people from all around the world. And then you're like superwoman. You're super mum. And then what happens? When you forget one thing, or your husband doesn't support you as much as what you need, or you can't afford childcare, or you go, oh, but no, don't worry, everyone, it's my dumb brain. We just blame our neurology when it's actually a support issue. You can't do it all. But when you can't do it all, instead of going, I can't do it all, you go, oh, it's neurological. And that's fine because society is going to help you. Suit society. They don't need to help Supermum because she's just blaming her brain when she can't do it all.
So
it's the emotional load of labour of motherhood, and we've internalized this idea that there's some cognitive deficit.
I'm laughing.
And I'm telling you, there's no cognitive deficit.
I can no longer.
You've been duped.
Yeah, I've been duped. I can no longer blame the brain. And it's funny because I launched my business a month, November 2022, a month before I had my twins. I started my podcast when the twins were 7 months old. So a couple things going back. If you have a miscarriage in your first trimester, does your brain change, or are you seeing it farther along?
We think most of the changes take place in the 3rd trimester.
Okay, but you still...
There might be some changes that take place, but the most significant reorganisation takes place in the 3rd trimester of pregnancy, primarily because we've got very, very, very high estradiol at that, and estrone, which the kind of estrogens of pregnancy at that point in time.
So if you go through 3rd trimester and then you have a loss... does your brain, do we have any data or science on whether or not we still have, there's changes, or it just has changed, that's it?
Can you imagine doing that study? Can you imagine recruiting those women?
No.
But it wouldn't be very nice. I don't think you get ethical approval for it for a start. I'm not sure I mean, we could look at perhaps, we couldn't even really look at, like adoptive mums, surrogate mothers. Most surrogates have had prior pregnancies. I think that's a mandatory thing. So we don't have any data on that. I think what we know is that the brain is kind of primed and put in a state of plasticity and kind of readiness to then learn and engage with the baby. And it's perhaps that process as well as part of it. Your brain's changed to look after the baby, and then the baby's perhaps reinforcing that kind of learning. We haven't got the pregnancy only and then not the parenting part. We've got the parenting part only from the fathers, and there's some small studies which got disrupted by COVID looking at lesbian mums. So 2 women, so one was pregnant and one was the caregiver but didn't have the pregnancy. But we haven't got enough data to make any kind of clear statements.
Because it would be interesting to know that if you couldn't carry the child yourself, whether or not your brain actually changes anyway because you're telling it, like there's just this love. Interesting.
We've got some of the data. We've got data around mothers who have adopted or fostered, who haven't had... I'm not sure whether some of them have had pregnancies or not. There is a little bit of research on that. And their brain, the changes are happening because of the pregnancy. And then they're being reinforced by the parenting. Okay, so let's be clear about that. We can't hope it's different. It's not. We've got data on the fathers whose brains change slightly, but it's dose dependent. Because the father can be there for conception and bugger off and never be seen again, or he could be the primary caregiver of that baby once it's born. So which father's brain do you think changes more? It's the one who's doing when you engage in a new activity, your brain changes and shifts to get better at doing that. So the fathers who are more engaged with parenting that we see their brains changing. There's a researcher called Darby Saxby, who's in California, and she's just signed a contract for a book called Dad Brain, which is very exciting. So she's going to be looking at how fathers' brains change as they become parents. And we do have a little bit of data looking at dads, but we've got less data looking at adoptive mothers who've never had the pregnancy, or the female partner of the woman who's gone through pregnancy, and that's what we would need. But I doubt their brains are going to change because they haven't had the pregnancy, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that they can't learn to parent, because we all know people who've been adopted and have the most loving, wonderful mothers. It's just kind of almost like Mother Nature's shortcut. She's just kind of trying to make it a little bit easier for the biological birth mum. Because the biological birth mum's the one that's going to be breastfeeding. I mean, you've got to look at our evolutionary past to make sense of this.
Yeah. And as a neuroscientist, as a mom, and women who say, for example, have to go back. I know, I'm in Ireland and we get very typically generous maternity leave. It's pretty standard for people to take 6 months to a year. It's very standard.
Similar here.
What do you think? When do you? But in California, a lot of women have to go back after 6 or 12 weeks because of the, just the money.
Terrible.
It's expensive.
Yeah.
As a neuroscientist, as a mom, somebody who studies the female brain, how long do you think typically? People's circumstances are different, but what would you say to women who have to go back after 6 or 12 weeks, or to the employers?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's terribly sad that if women don't want to and they're forced back, and I think we tend to forget. A lot of these decisions are often made on an Excel spreadsheet, and we're talking about, here in Australia, there's a big push to get women back into the economy and make sure our superannuation isn't, we haven't got a gender gap, and sometimes we forget there's a family is a little ecosystem, and there's a little human in there as well. It's not just mum on the spreadsheet and her financial situation. We've got this like human ecosystem where everyone is kind of synchronized and kind of moving together. It's like a little, like a little pond of animals and plants and water, and you can't sort of consider how each one of them functions individually. It's hard for me to separate my personal experiences out from this, because I chose to, leave paid employment and work for myself when I had my boys, because I had such a lovely childhood with a mum who was at home, and I was but I grew up in the 70s in New Zealand. It was easy. Mum could easily do that then. There's different pressures on women now, and I think it's really sad when financial and economic pressures take precedence over, nurturing that little baby and being able to make the choice to be at home if that's what you want to do. I certainly chose that. I won't say it was necessarily easy, especially because I'd gone, being career, type A overachiever, just to get shit done. Suddenly parenting 2 boys, they're 18 months apart. I only had 2. I stopped after that. Don't know how you do 4. And it was so hard. And I always feel really emotional when I think about this, because they're teenagers now, and it's like in the blink of an eye. They were so tiny, and I felt like the days were so long and they were never going to end. And it was they were super easy babies, such straightforward, fed, slept. Second one was born 5 a.m. I put him in the nursery so I could get some sleep at 8 p.m. at night, and I wake up at 4 a.m. Had 8 hours sleep the first night he was born, and he was still asleep. Perfect children. I don't know how. Me coming to terms with who I was as a mother and my expectations of what I thought motherhood would look like and be like, which are the stories I'd carried through, right? And particularly because I had such a great mum, that matrescence journey was incredibly hard, as it is for a lot of women. But we didn't have the word matrescence 16 years ago. If we had have had that word, it would have opened up a new way of thinking to me. I just thought parenting was going to be about looking after the babies, not turning myself inside out and becoming a new version of myself. So I struggled with that. Had I gone back to work, maybe that would have been different. But I made that conscious decision not to do that, because my husband's from Dublin. I grew up in New Zealand. We're living in Sydney. we didn't have any immediate family around. And I thought, I don't want to be dropping off and picking up and checking in and checking out and running here and there. And my kids, I had to put something aside for a while. So I put my career aside. Financially, I was able to do that, but I also made that decision to prioritize I wanted them to have this golden preschool life. Because we live by the beach, and I wanted to go to my mother's group, and I wanted to take them to the park, and I wanted to bake biscuits, and I just wanted to have this really slow, gentle, free childhood where they would grow up in the great outdoors. And it was really hard, but I gave that to them, and I'm so proud of myself for doing that. I often look back and think, I wish I could tell my the then person who used to sometimes cry every afternoon when it got to 3. I was like, how will I survive until bedtime? And then suddenly now I go to bed and they don't. I put myself to bed.
I feel like,
and now I'm like, I put myself to bed, and I'm like watching where my son is on Life 360. Going, is he going to come home? What's he doing in bed? And I'm like waiting for him to come home at 1 a.m. instead. It's a bit different now.
I feel like though you have
lathered then about nothing.
Yeah. I feel like though that you just have this amazing mindset. I feel like you have a strong mindset around just what you're telling yourself, and that seems to have come through your childhood and your own mom of not saying PMS is going to change you, not saying your hormones are going to change you, and that this really strong mindset of what you're telling yourself. And I know I touched on this kind of earlier, that I'm a huge believer in the power of manifestation. Now, when I say manifestation, I mean your mindset, what you're telling yourself, achieving goals, setting goals, taking action to achieve them. Not that it's magic, it's just gonna happen for you. But you wrote an article, and you can explain about it, because when I read this article, I found it really funny because I saw a young neuroscientist on a US talk show, big, huge talk show. And it was, the presenter was, I can't remember her name, but she's a famous singer. And she said, okay, tell us about manifestation. And the neuroscientist said, it's in the RAS. It's right here. This is where manifestation happens. And then I went and I read your article, and you were like, this neuro nonsense, you're not just going to manifest your dream life by thinking, wishing it. So can you tell me about what manifestation means to you as a neuroscientist? And you get pissed off with kind of maybe younger, more inexperienced neuroscientists, because neuroscience now is cool, right? So there's a lot of younger ones.
Pissed off with them. I mean, she needs to pick up a neuroscience textbook because she won't find it in any neuroscience textbook. She's just got carried away, but that's fine. You do you, boo. I just do me. I couldn't care less what anyone else is doing. Maybe I've always had quite a strong sense of self, and I've got a ton of personal sort of agency and a strong sort of sense of who I am, and I don't really care about anyone else. Which, no, I do care about other people, but I don't care what anyone else thinks or is doing. And that's good, and a lot of that's informed by science as well. And I think I just had a very lucky childhood, and I've married an awesome man. It's because he's from Dublin, that's why. But the whole, I mean, I get asked a lot because I teach a lot of neuroscience courses, and people would often ask me about manifestation and the RAS, which is essentially this network of neurons in the brainstem of our brain, and it kind of connects almost like your cerebral cortex to your spinal cord and your cerebellum. And there's a couple of critical kind of little nodules in there, like the locus coeruleus and the raphe nuclei, and you don't need to know the names of them. But if you were to pick up a textbook, you would see it doesn't typically get called the RAS. It often gets called the ascending reticular system. Just to switch around of the way that those words are sort of said out loud. But essentially its primary role is in kind of switching you from awake to sleep, because you have to fall asleep and then you wake up again. So that kind of switch from wake to sleep. And so it's really about maintaining consciousness. And we also understand that if you interfere with that, specifically that little system there, you would ablate it, you'd be rendered unconscious forever. And we understand that, it's that's kind of its sort of role. And it also plays this role in kind of filtering sensory information coming in from our body, what we need to pay attention to and what we don't. And I suspect that kind of minor role that it plays has been turned into this idea that when you start thinking about something, you start thinking about, green Volkswagens. You see green Volkswagens everywhere. You haven't made the green Volkswagens appear. I think the RAS plays some role in sort of filtering stimuli, and so it can influence your awareness and what you pay attention to. I sort of think that that's kind of where this sort of idea has come from. But I mean, how it typically gets used is, you can manifest because of your RAS, which is nonsensical. It's like saying you can win an Olympic medal because of your muscles. I mean, those things have nothing. I mean, you would use your muscles to win an Olympic medal, but you're not winning an Olympic medal because you're using your muscles. It kind of gets used in this. It's this seductive allure of the neuroscience explanation, which is a real phenomenon whereby if someone names a brain part or shows you an image of a brain, you will just believe whatever they've said is 100% true, simply because neuroscience appears to be this hard science, which is kind of complex. And so who's going to argue with a neuroscientist? And the analogy I give in this kind of article I wrote on LinkedIn, which was just a rant of me going, can we just stop saying manifestation is real because of the locus coeruleus? Well, no one's saying that. They're saying the RAS. Can we stop saying manifestation is real because of the Raphe nuclei? We might as well say manifestation is real because of the optic chiasm. I mean, you're just naming a brain part. You're not making... It's like fairies are real because of the hypothalamus. It's just rubbish. You don't make something real because you name a part of the brain. And the analogy I give is kind of set aside the brain. You're there at a grand piano. You've never seen one before, but someone opens it up and says, well, this is how the piano works. You've got the hammers to strike the keys, strike the strings, and that makes music. And they explain to you the internal workings of the piano. You can't manifest a flawless playing of Beethoven's, symphonies. You can't suddenly play a symphony or play the symphony, the piano piece of the symphony, because you understand how the inside of the piano works. So that's kind of this ridiculousness that kind of mirrors this idea that you think about something that becomes real because we've named a piece of neurobiology. You've still got to do the work. You've still got to put the practice in. You've got to take action. Regardless of knowing the name of this body part or brain part, you're going to get an Olympic medal because you understand how myosin and actin contracts in a thigh muscle. It's going to do bugger all to help you win your gold medal. So genuine complex science is genuine and complex and it's sometimes counterintuitive. So when I've talked about the structural changes that take place in women's brains during pregnancy, we're actually seeing the cortex getting slightly thinner. Now, that sounds like it's degenerating. And so you go, oh, your brain shrinks when you're pregnant. That's why I become dumb. That's not what happens. What happens often in the brain is when we get better at a task, when we're learning something new, the brain wants to conserve its energy, and it often streamlines and refines itself and becomes more efficient, so it uses less of the brain. So sometimes when we see a little part of the brain becoming smaller, it's not degenerating or in deficit. It's often becoming more efficient and streamlined. So sometimes neuroscience is counterintuitive, but we really like these sciencey sounding explanations for something out there. It's like I said, if fairies and goblins, leprechauns aren't suddenly going to become true because of retinal ganglion cells. Just to throw some words out at you.
Okay, our time is up, so I want to ask you one final question. Females and their brain. What is the one thing that you would say to females about their brain? You can tell them anything. You can tell them any fact that you want to tell them. What's your favorite female fact?
I think I've ranted and raved enough about the idea that we have a real strong deficit focus when it comes to us and our brains instead of a strengths-based focus. And if anyone works in therapy or coaching or education, you'll understand, like looking for strengths. The one lesson I learned, the strongest message that I would share about especially from my first book, but also my second, both about the female brain, was and this is just about brains actually, not just females, is that I thought I was going to write a book about how hormones were driving the car, which they are not. Occasionally they might, but usually they don't. It doesn't matter whether you're like a newborn baby or the new mum holding that newborn baby. You need each other. Whether you're a kid kind of going through puberty into high school, the strongest determinant of a good outcome will kind of be, your friendship groups and the people around you. When you're a new mum, the strongest determinants of good health outcomes and mental health outcomes are social support. When you kind of get to the later kind of years in your life, that the strongest predictors of good healthy outcomes for health and well-being, mental health, brain health, dementia risk reduction, just overall physical health and even longevity are social networks. And I think I think we learned kind of in our bones during COVID with all of the lockdowns and the isolation and this, social distancing. I hate even thinking about that time and those words, how much we really need each other. And that's kind of the most important thing. That's what's driving the car. I think if you get to whatever point you are in life and you kind of cast your mind back through your lifespan and think, what are the strongest memories? What do they involve? What are the highest of the highs? And usually they're just like completely entwined and embedded with other people and relationships and communities and sharing stories with other humans, not with like you flip an estradiol level. So I think that the loudest voice in the crowd is the people around us, and that's the greatest source of strength and resilience that we should be seeking out.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I am going to change up how I think about my brain during menstrual cycle, how I talk to my kids about hormones, everything. It is like the aha brain moment for me today. So I really appreciate your time. I hope you come to Dublin. When you come to Dublin with your husband.
Yeah, I come to Dublin lots. Yeah, I was at Dublin at New Year's. Swam in 40 foot a number of times over New Year.
You did?
My husband's family are right by there. Yeah. We come to Dublin frequently.
Oh, please look me up when you come. I'm smack bang in the middle. I'd love to meet you. Have a coffee
cool.
And a chat. I'm not jumping into the 40 foot. I don't like the okay. I'm not going to tell myself.
No.
I don't like the
cold. I've
cold.
got family in Ranelagh as well, so I could also do the kind of the bougie cafe restaurant scene too.
Yeah. I'm close to there, so I will meet you there in the lovely cafes. And thank you again so much.